This brief video provides an animated look at the main process figure from the paper. It basically offers two dimensions. One is the level of analysis within the organization, from the external environment at the top through senior executives, the senior and management teams, and then frontline employees, as you kind of go vertically down through the organization. And then the horizontal axis looks at, if you like, a singular focus on employees on the left side to the dual focus of employees on the right. And the whole purpose of this paper, and indeed the process framework, is to make an argument for a series of interventions that senior executives can put in place that will enable the organization to go from a singular focus to a dual focus, to the managing of strategic dualities. And there are three basic elements to this framework. The first is what we call the counterweight logic, where we're basically saying that the senior executives, in order to sort of wrestle people out of their status quo, out of their comfortable existence, they have to put in place an alternative point of view. Now, in the case of the company under discussion here, they move from a singular to a dual headquarters. So the counterweight there was the public announcement that the chief executive and part of his management team would move to Beijing in order to wrestle the company away from its comfortable European surroundings. So that was the very first step from the point of view of employees. What, of course, it's doing is it's emphasizing an alternative imperative in addition to the one that they're very comfortable with. Now, the risk of that, of course, is that it actually creates a bit of a tension between the old comfortable status quo and a new alternative. So the second stage in the framework is what we call the hybrid engine logic, which is this notion that having taken people out of the one reality and unfreezing in sort of Lewinian terms, they move towards a hybrid engine logic where both engines, both perspectives are managed, are treated equally. And there were lots of mechanisms specified in the paper about exactly how that was done. But the idea is that rather than trying to make big structural changes, what the company was doing in this particular case was they were trying to say both the European and the Asian headquarters are equally important. And they were trying to create essentially a balanced point of view whereby both arguments, both imperatives were treated equally. Now, the risk of that, of course, is that it also creates a new tension. And in this case, the tension is essentially complexity, which is asking frontline employees to be doing two very different things at the same time. And it required them to change their working style, and it required the senior executives to spend an awful lot of time on airplanes and on conference calls, keeping the two perspectives working. So as that hybrid engine logic is starting to sustain itself, but the tensions start to arise, that gave way to what we called a flywheel logic in our case study, which was this notion, we borrowed the concept from Jim Collins, which is that as a change process starts to really take shape, you can imagine the flywheel starting to move, whereby keeping it moving is much easier than getting it moving in the first place. So the idea here is that we are gradually pushing the change process deeper in the organization. We're trying to get people to take personal responsibility for the different points of view that we're trying to exercise. And essentially we're getting ownership of the new agenda, the dual agenda, at top and bottom levels and everything in between. So gradually we are increasing the focus of employees across the organization on these dual elements. Now, of course, the story doesn't quite finish there, because it is actually quite difficult to keep such a flywheel spinning in exactly the way you want. So in our thinking about this, and we saw little bits of this in evidence, there is then a sort of a periodic monitoring and review process underway by the executives at the top to say, are we really creating a sustainable model here that keeps us continuing to focus on the dual imperatives that we started with? Or indeed, is it possible that a completely new imperative is needed at some point? So that's kind of circles back to, at some point, rethinking whether the change process needs to be invigorated again with a new counterweight. But ultimately, the three steps we see are sequential. In the case of the company we studied here, it took about 3 years for it to work its way through, and we believe that there are generalizability opportunities for taking this to other settings and other types of duality.